TCU has to clearly communicate their plan to Adam Schobel so they don't lose another young, talented quarterback.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 years. Thank you for listening or tuning in today. We're brought to you by FanDuel. New customers at FanDuel.com or on the FanDuel app. You make one $5 bet, win or lose, get up to $200 in bonus bets. TCU early enrollees are on campus right now, or they're coming throughout the rest of this week. Hope all my Texas friends are safe. I know there's some winter weather coming through. Hope everybody's good. The man I'm talking about here in segment one, he is not going to be the most impactful player for the team this year. But moving forward, it's imperative that they have him engaged, they keep him on the roster. Adam Schobel, true freshman quarterback, coming over from Columbus, four-star talent. He went on sort of a journey in recruiting. He was committed to Baylor. He was committed to Oklahoma State. He eventually commits to TCU. He has a Horned Frog legacy, much like Haas Haney was. But we all know what happened with Haas. Haas decides to move on after one season. He hits the transfer portal. I said at the time, or I said when that happened, I truly think keeping a young, talented quarterback on your roster is the toughest thing for college football coaches to do right now. I would go as far as to say it's one of the toughest things in sports to do right now. Because everybody wants to play. Everybody's ready to contribute right away. And if they don't get that opportunity, there's a decent chance they move on. We saw with Haas, when he committed, Chandler Morris was the guy. By the time he got to campus, Josh Hoover was sort of an unproven commodity at the time. He'd only had 6 starts. Haas thought, hey, I have an opportunity to start here pretty quickly. But it didn't end up happening like that. Josh Hoover sets records this past year for single-season passing yards, and all of a sudden he looks at the writing on the wall and he says, you know what? I think this guy's going to be the dude for the next season at least, but possibly for the next couple of seasons. I need to move on. He ends up at Oklahoma State, where Doug Meacham is now the play caller. For Adam Schobel, it's more clear. I mean, the good news is it's more clear and precise what's happening already. Like he sees what's going on. Josh Hoover is the guy right now. He understands that. And while it doesn't seem ridiculous, even in today's world of college football, to say to a QB, hey, you might have to sit for a couple seasons, I'm concerned about this. Now, it didn't really end up working, so maybe it doesn't matter. But TCU did make an effort to get Haas involved in the offense this season. I don't think the way they went about it was the best way to do it, by only using him in the run game, not allowing him to pass the ball, not really letting him see. It wasn't really even like a special package for him. It was basically just like, hey, you can run quarterback power or quarterback sweep or those type of plays. And they would throw him in there for a play or two and then pull him out, with the exception of that Cincinnati game where they put him in for the final drive. You don't really have that scenario at play with Adam Schobel. Adam is not a statue back there, but he's not really a dual threat. And if he's going to use his feet to make something happen, it's most likely going to be more in the mold of, let me escape the pocket and turn it into a scramble drill, keep my eyes downfield, make plays. So you don't have the luxury of selling him on, hey, there's a clear path for you to get on the field this season, even if it's sort of in a gimmicky way to a certain extent. I think what you have to do, though, if you're the TCU coaching staff, this is what I would do. I would say, look, come in here and compete for the number 2 job. Compete for the backup quarterback spot. Ken Seals, barring unforeseen circumstances, is going to be back. Last season, it was sort of odd because, as we said, Haas had this package of plays that he would run, but based on the depth chart and just based on the way the coaching staff was handling it, I felt like if Josh were to go down last season, Ken Seals would have been the guy. And I'm not saying you just name Adam the number 2 QB as soon as he steps on campus. I'm not implying that you say, hey, you got it. You don't give it to him. But give him the opportunity to compete for that job. And if he wins it in spring practice or in fall camp, then be honest with him and be like, look, if something happens during the regular season, you're going to be the guy that steps in there and makes plays. You're going to be the dude that gets to take the reins of this offense and gets to take over, even though you're a true freshman. I don't feel like you can really worry about red shirts anymore. I mean, that's somewhat of a simplistic explanation and maybe a little naive on my part, but I look at the way college football is working right now. These dudes want to play. These freshmen, they want to get on the field. They're not interested in redshirting. So if there's a chance to get Adam Schobel in the game in the second half, if you have a big lead, do it. Let him throw the ball around. Give him those chances. Because I appreciate Ken Seals. I think it's awesome that he's here. He came into the program at a time where TCU needed him. And he has value on this roster and in that quarterback room. But he has reps. He is a former SEC starting QB at Vandy. So you have a good feel for what he can do. You don't need to throw him in there in many live game situations. He should be ready to rock and roll if he's called upon. But for Adam, let him have that experience. Give him that opportunity to go make plays when it's appropriate. And if he wins that number 2 job and you give him that title, listen, it's not a starter, but it's a clear indication of, hey, we believe in you enough that you're one snap away from being in the game and being on the football field. That instills confidence, and it also just gives you a clear direction in the way that you're moving at QB. So it's important. I mean, some of you might look at this situation and be like, well, why is this such a big deal? You don't want to get on a hamster wheel of we bring in talented quarterbacks. There's sort of a log jam with the starter, and then they move on. And eventually somebody's going to take over and be the guy. It's not like Josh Huber's going to be here forever. But it's that tough balance of, yes, we have a team right now. We need to win, but we also want to invest in our future. So how do we make sure that from the moment this guy's on campus, we're communicating to him, hey, you're next. And we're going to prepare you like you're next. We're going to prepare you like you're the future at this position. Give him a chance to go on that number 2 job. Give him that confidence and say, hey, we believe in you enough that we'll at least give you the opportunity to get these reps, get these snaps, and see what you can do against Ken Seals, somebody who's been around college football for 4 or 5 seasons. And one intriguing aspect of it too is Josh and Adam are similar in a lot of ways. Now Adam's big. He's got a big frame. But they are both what I would say, or what I would categorize as more traditional pocket passers. So you don't really have to change up your approach or your philosophy or play calling. You can give him a lot of those opportunities that you would typically give Josh with the 2s and let him work with these young wideouts, because the people that he'd be throwing to in that scenario would be Braylon James, Terry Shelton, Ed Small, Jordan Bailey. The players that are going to be the next wave at the receiver group. Let those young players grow together. and make sure that Adam Schobel knows this is what we intend to do. This is what our plan is. When we come back, you guys had some good thoughts about yesterday's show, talking about the O-line, so we'll talk about that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Everybody's trying to save money, man. It's such a tough thing to do. Budgeting, canceling those subscriptions, finding those recurrent payments that you didn't know about. Make it easier with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today and check it out. Rocket Money helps you find unwanted or unused subscriptions. They have over 500 million customers, and they average saving people about $740 a year if they unlock and use all the app's premium features. Give Rocket Money a try today. They'll help you budget. They'll help you hit your goals. It's not just, hey, here's this subscription that you didn't know about. They'll also help you make a tangible plan for this is what we want our family to look like financially in 2025. Get off to the right start. Get off on the right foot by downloading Rocket Money today or going to rocketmoney.com/lockedon to cancel those unwanted subscriptions. Put money back in your pocket. Do it today. So yesterday I talked about TCU and their approach in the transfer portal. And I said that in this first window, I thought they failed by not addressing the offensive line. Next season, if the season started tomorrow, I think your starters would be Ryan Hughes, Cade Bennett, Colton Deary, Carson Bruno, and Ben Taylor Whitfield. The only one I'd be unsure about at the moment would be Bruno. That could be Remington Strickland. That could be Cooper Powers, maybe Samir Camacho. I feel like there'll be some open competition there. So you would be replacing 3 of your 5, possibly 4 of your 5 starters, depending on who wins that battle at the other guard spot. Now, Bennett is very experienced, and I think he'll be good, but he's coming off a back injury, which those are always tricky. Ryan Hughes and Ben Taylor Whitfield are both really young. Now, Ben Taylor Whitfield's had a lot of snaps, but he's still, going into his 3rd season. And I just believe you have to open up the checkbook and go find a tackle, go find a guard, because you cannot build an offensive line from the ground up in the portal. You can't just go get 5 guys and expect it to be good. But we're not talking about 5. We're talking about 1 or 2. Now, they did add Rasheed Jackson, who's a tackle from Incarnate Word. I think that's sort of a project, though. And I just believe that you have to be better up front because that's the one thing that's sort of holding you back on offense. Now, they figured it out pass blocking last season, but the run blocking is still a mess. And when you have a team that is in a position to be really good offensively once again, it doesn't make any sense to let this be a lingering issue. This will be 3 straight seasons if you don't address it, or if your young guys or your current players that are in the program don't improve, where we'd be like, oh, man, this offense, good skill talent, a lot of different options, but just can't protect the QB. Can't get easy yardage on 1st and 2nd down to create more manageable 3rd downs. Can't run the ball consistently. And a few of you had good thoughts in the comment section that I wanted to get to. One user said, I wonder if they're placing a lot of faith in getting the guys recruited out of high school onto the field. That makes sense since they're going on year 4 and hopefully have some of their guys developed enough to see the field. If they have to rely on the portal to get started year after year, we should look at a change at OL coach because we shouldn't have gotten blue chip talent if the talent we've gotten hasn't panned out. So some good points. And I think if you ask the coaching staff, what's the plan up front, that's what they would tell you. If you're like, hey, why didn't you go get a tackle? Why didn't you go get a guard? They would say, well, we've invested heavily in the high school ranks in the past few recruiting cycles on players that we think have the talent to be competent starting offensive linemen, and it's time for them to step up and play. Another thing that is unique to this era of college football and that makes the job really hard. As a coach, you have to make a decision. pretty much every offseason now at one or at multiple position groups where you say, okay, do I trust my young guys to step up and make it happen? Are they developed enough? Have we instilled enough of a foundation there that they can step in and do this? Or do we go in the portal once again and find an established player somewhere else who can come in and pick up the system quickly and can hit the ground running? And so the last few seasons, TCU's done that on the offensive line. They went and got Bless Harris last year. They had Mason Strickland and Carson Bruno, Cade Bennett, and it was supposed to be sort of, all right, let's fill in the gap while these young guys get ready. So I understand that perspective. And yeah, at a certain point, you do have to sort of roll the dice and say, okay, this is what we're here for. That's putting a lot of pressure, though, as you said, on A.J. Ricker and this offensive coaching staff to have those guys ready to play. And I just think 2025 is such a pivotal year. You have an opportunity to do some of those things that every fan wants to see, which is be in contention for conference title, be in contention for a playoff spot. Can you afford to throw a young left tackle out there and essentially let him take his lumps? I'm just not sure that's, with the expectations that TCU has this year, I'm just not sure that that's possible. But I think that's what they would tell you they're trying to do, or they're thinking they're going to do. CJ says, top offensive line talent is trying to make it to the league. The current offense doesn't make offensive line look good or put them in a position to shine. No great run blocking lineman would transfer to an air raid offense, so it's kind of self-fulfilling. Yeah, another interesting point. I think this will be, again, a year where we sort of, a lot of these questions that we have will hopefully become more clear. But, you know, one of the things that, and yesterday I was like, I think Kendall Briles did a good job this past year overall. But one of the things that when he took the job that was said about him, or the narrative that was put out there about him as well, you know, he's got those sort of air raid tree principles, or that veer and shoot, that lineage, that foundation. But he also knows how to create an effective run game and use like pre-snap motion and other things to make the run game really hum. And he did that well at Arkansas with Sam Pittman. But the further we are removed from that tenure at Arkansas, I think it's becoming clearer that was the emphasis on the run game was more of a Sam Pittman initiative, right? Like that's what he's a former offensive line coach. He wants to be physical. He wants his teams to run the ball. So I'm not saying he came up with all the schemes, but I think he really pushed Kendall to do that and have that, you know, aspect of the offense to be featured. And for the past couple of years, we've sort of come to the conclusion that, okay, Kendall's somewhat handcuffed by the personnel he has. And so he's trying to be creative to make up for it by using a lot of the short, quick passing game stuff. And he's not really an air raid guy by trade. So surely this is just something that he's having to do because of what they have on the roster. But if you go through another season where there's no effective run game and there's really not a big effort to develop one, then yeah, I think at a certain point we got to be like, well, what's the philosophy here? And what is it dependent on? Is it just because you have a QB who's really comfortable slinging it around? Or because your offensive line is not making it work? At a certain point, that falls on the offensive coaching staff. Because they're the ones that recruit these players. They're the ones that develop them. So you can't keep blaming other people for that. So this year will be another chance to see how that shakes out and what the process is going to look like. But some good thoughts there. The bottom line to me, I think you got to go get at least one starting O lineman in the portal before the season starts. And I mean, it can be somebody that can come in and compete with Whitfield or Hughes, but I just don't think you can roll into the season as is with what they got. We'll come back and talk some women's hoops. They beat Kansas on the road. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. So TCU men's basketball, they actually played this afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, because of the snowstorm and all the issues traveling in the Kansas area. They went to Lawrence, Kansas. They played the Fog, and they took down KU by a final score of 80-73. Sedona Prince had 30 points. She was a force. They could not slow her down. They had nobody on that team that can match her size and ability. Haley Van Lith had 19. Taylor Bigby had 12. She had 8 points in the fourth quarter. Madison Connor, a little bit of an off night, only ended up with 9 points. One of the cool things about this group is they just got a lot of weapons. They're not a team that runs like 8 or 9 deep, but they've got a number of players that can score. They shot 52% from the field, really efficient offensively. They were down at the end of the first quarter, but came back, had a 6-point lead at halftime. And they sort of, went back and forth. They would push it out to like 8, 10, 12, and then it would get back down. Even late in that ball game, Haley Van Lith had to hit a few key free throws to really put it away. But they do come away with a victory. One thing that I've noticed since the NC State game, the NC State game was a little bit of an adventure at the end of that ball game, trying to make sure you closed it out with victory. Went through a long stretch of not being able to score, and the crunch time execution didn't look great. But today, that game in Cincinnati where they pulled away late, Colorado in the second half, in the fourth quarter, they had a brief spell where they couldn't score, but for the most part, when they needed a bucket, they went and got it. And it was different people. It was Haley Van Lith she threw it to Sedona Prince on the free throw line. She ran around kind of like it was basically a dribble handoff where she didn't take the handoff. She just got to the rim and got down low and scored. Taylor Bigby had a nice drive where she finished and got an and one. Bigby is a clutch player. She's had a couple big buckets for this team this year. Sedona Prince had a nice lay-in on a good find. I think it was from Van Lith. So they just executed when they had to. Like when Kansas would sort of put some pressure on them and it felt like, oh, no, this could get away. It was like, no, we're shutting the door on that. We're still in control. And I really appreciate the way that they've been able to do that in those crunch time minutes so far this season. So still undefeated in conference play at 4-0. I thought they would be – I figured they'd been defeated at this point. I thought they would win these games by bigger margins, but so far they're still taking care of business and getting the job done. And, I mean, it's really crazy the turnaround that they had. Last year's team was more talented, I think, than we saw because of all the injuries. But still, this has been just an outstanding run to begin the season. They play Tech on Saturday, UCF for a second time on Tuesday, and then they get Utah, who's ranked, Oklahoma State after that, who's not ranked at the moment but is having a good start to Big 12 play, Baylor and Iowa State. So that schedule ramps up quickly and will get much more difficult over the next few weeks. But they're doing what they have to do right now, which is against some teams that they should beat. They're racking up victories, and they're not really leaving a lot of doubt. Go on the road this afternoon, kind of a weird travel situation. They kept their cool about them, and they shot the ball well and got it done. One more thing I wanted to hit on before we go. Matt Clark said in the YouTube comments, I think Sonny had a lot of NIL money to play with relative to other teams the last 2 years after the national championship game run. My guess is the NIL money is drying up because of the what have you done for me lately scenario. The price for a backup quarterback has apparently gone from $75K to $500K. My guess is something similar has happened with offensive linemen. I'm sure Brockermeyer got a bag. Yes, I mean, they're expensive. O-linemen in the portal are very expensive because they're hard to find. It's hard to find guys at that position that can play. But I think you got to get one. And I can't speak to the idea that there's less resources now because they've struggled the last couple of seasons. I think that's fair to say, though, from a logical standpoint. And I know they spent pretty heavily in the portal after that national title game run. And they went and they got a lot of guys that I would say were kind of project guys. Maybe they dealt with injuries, or maybe they just didn't hit the field. The 3 Alabama guys, JoJo Earl, Trey Sanders, Tommy Brockermeyer. None of them really lived up to exactly what TCU wanted. And so I believe that's led to them changing their approach to more proven players that have played a lot of snaps. But maybe it's also given them less resources to work with as well. We'll be back tomorrow talking everything TCU athletics. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.